Well, there's two things to say. First of all, that a year on from the 7th of October attacks, I have to tell you, the Jewish community is still very much in a state of shock. It's still very much concerned about what's going on. And we see that a year on since the attacks, really, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Israel rhetoric has only increased. So, as you say now, it started on October the 7th with what was Hamas in Gaza, and it quickly has grown to this whole axis of resistance, as they like to call themselves, across the Middle East, which is fighting Israel. So Israel's now fighting on multiple fronts. It's having to fight this same hatred, though. This hatred is not a hatred just of Israel, it's a hatred of Jews. And really, it's a hatred of freedom-loving nations. And so the point number one is that the Jewish community in the UK and around the world is extremely concerned about what's going on. The lack of support we're getting from the international community is very worrying for me personally. And we see it from the UK as well, a lack of leadership, really, in allowing Israel to tackle these problems, these systematic problems. So that's point number one. I think the point number two that I'd make is that we are now seeing that the attacks, or the limited attacks, should I say, in Israel against the Hezbollah threat. And as part of that limited ground incursion, we're seeing Israel tackle terrorists. But the rhetoric we hear from the mainstream media, I must say not GB News, but the rhetoric we hear from the mainstream media is that Israel is somehow provoking terrorists. And I think we should always remember it's the opposite, that a year on from the 7th of October, the Israelis do not want to be fighting on multiple fronts. They do not want to be having to evacuate their people out of homes in the north. But they're having to do that because of terrorist threats. I just think it's an important comparison to make, that if the UK had faced even one day of rocket attacks on its southern border from another country, never mind if it's from a terrorist state like Israel's been facing, they would respond straight away. We've seen Israel for nearly 11 months only respond very in a very small way. And a year on from that, they've decided to go in and deal with the terrorist threat. And I think the lack of support we're getting, or Israel is getting, from the world, from the leadership of the world, is a problem.
Well, hold on. I mean, I do agree that there has been a weird pressure being put on Israel to cease and desist rather than Hamas and the actual aggressors. That's my view. But you have had support from the international community. For example, the major attack, you've had two big attacks from Iran, and the international community, Jordan and everybody, we came out that did not allow that to happen. So that's not quite true. I mean, it's not... Well, I appreciate that there's a weird energy with the pro-Palestinian lobby, but you have had support from the international community.
Of course, there has been some support, and we're, of course, grateful for any support we get as a UK Jewish community. And I have to say, both UK governments have been very supportive of the Jewish community in the UK. And we've seen, record investment in security measures for Jewish institutions and schools, etc. So that's been very much well received. However, on an international front, the daily calls we hear for a ceasefire is not the type of support we need to see. Now, of course, everyone wants a ceasefire, but the pressure is massively in Hamas's court, in Hezbollah's court for a ceasefire. It would only take Hamas to release the hostages and we'd have a ceasefire in the next hour. But they will not do that. In fact, they surround their leader with hostages just so Israel will not kill the murderous terrorist who committed or orchestrated the October 7th attack.
What about, though, a lot of people are talking about the number of people that are being killed in Gaza. The figures are often changing. I think the last one I looked at was 40,000 or 17,000. I don't know where the numbers are coming from, and as you know, they're possibly from Hamas, which then makes it difficult to sort of believe.
Well, a lot of those numbers will include terrorists who have been killed.
Absolutely,
so,
that's the other point.
And I don't think anyone in the freedom-loving world will want to see those people still remain in this world.
Well, some people do, because they were complaining about the pager attack, which was, in my view, discriminate. But I did hear a lot of media saying it's indiscriminate, this could have hurt a small child, but anyone with a pager would have been an operative for Hezbollah. So...
Correct. And in fact, also, reports I've read show that Israel didn't just detonate all the pagers in one go. They actually did so systematically once they checked where the holders of the pagers were, to check that no civilians were being harmed. And I think the measures that Israel goes to protect civilians in all of its attacks, defensive attacks, is remarkable. I mean, no other country in the history of warfare, as far as I'm aware, has ever gone to those lengths to minimise civilian harm, dropping letters from aeroplanes, moving civilians out of the way, as I say, not killing a murderous terrorist because he could harm civilians, etc., and the list goes on. And I think now we have to remember Israel is defending itself rather than provoking these attacks. There was a ceasefire on the 6th of October last year. This day last year, there was a ceasefire. The next day, Israelis woke up to sirens, to murderous terrorists in a music festival, to their homes being invaded by murderers, by rapists, and we saw babies burnt alive. And that is when the ceasefire ended. That's when Israel had to say, we have the first duty of any government is to defend its people, to keep its people safe, to keep its borders safe. And in order to do that, we have to go after these terrorists. And I think, we need to see, instead of the typical calls we hear from the Foreign Secretary and others, just calling for a ceasefire in Lebanon and for the hostilities to end. Of course, the hostilities need to end, but you can't do that. You can't end the hostilities when you have a murderous terrorist regime on your border looking to kill you, sending over thousands of rockets. And I think we need to start seeing some grown-up discussion around how we support Israel to tackle this problem.
But some people see Israel as a terrorist. Now, that's just another view. It's not my view. I don't hold that view. But there is the argument, and even yesterday on my show, somebody said, oh, the terrorist Israel, and I just thought, I don't see that. But what about that? Because we're looking at, obviously, now there's bombing in Lebanon, people are dying there. Do you feel the war's getting a little bit out of hand now, maybe Benjamin Netanyahu, who's slightly overstretching things, or is this necessary?
Well, there's 2 points there. Just first on the Israel terrorist state. I mean, all you have to do is to walk down the streets of Jerusalem. I mean, I lived in Jerusalem for a small period of time, and you will see that there are Jews, Christians, Arabs, Bedouins, etc., all living together happily, peacefully, many of them as Israeli citizens. So all you have to do is walk down the streets and you'll see it's the opposite of a terrorist state. Now, if I was to go into Gaza or into Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon as a visible Jew, I don't think I'd still be around to tell the tale. Yeah. So Israel is the opposite of a terrorist state. It's the only democracy in the Middle East, and it's a freedom-loving country. Now, is Israel fighting too many fronts? Unfortunately, that is the nature of the Middle East at the moment. We see Iran as an aggressor, and it's encouraging its proxies all across the Middle East to attack Israel. So I think there's 2 things to say. First of all, the international community needs to work with Israel to counter the Iranian threat. The threat, by the way, is not just to Israel, it's to the whole world. Iran would quite happily kill people on the streets of Britain and the US and many other countries. I think we need to work seriously to tackle that threat. But I think also we need to support the Israeli government. And it's not just Netanyahu. I mean, the people of Israel are quite united in the fight against terrorism. There are many divisions in Israeli society. That's one of the strengths of its democracy. And if you had those divisions in Arab countries, I don't think they'd be around for very long, because different opinions are not tolerated. In Israel, there are many fronts it's having to tackle, unfortunately, but I hope the international community will work together so that we can fight those threats for the whole of the peace in the whole of the world. Really.
And to add to that, I'd actually like to see a little bit more pressure being put on Iran and the other communities to have a ceasefire, not just on Israel.
Most definitely.
Because Israel are the most receptive to that notion.
Well, Iran is the head of the octopus, and its tentacles are everywhere. We need to stop that head before we can stop the tentacles.